Hey everybody, and welcome back to Digital Artcast. Thanks to everybody for tuning in again for another episode. For all you guys who have been messaging me and asking where I have been, because it has been a couple of months at this point without an episode. I have just been busy with my head down doing work. The podcast has been a great thing for the last 8 years to do it, and the 100 people I've talked to has been fantastic to really get on my resume. But at this point, I'm just trying to do as much work as I can and try to keep my head down during this time when the world is a bit on fire. So hoping you guys, as always, as I say every episode, are staying safe and creative wherever you are in the world. Today's episode again is a bit similar, or an echo vibe of something I've done previously when we've talked about user interface and user experience. When we talked to Fernando the last time, way back a couple of months ago, you guys seemed to really resonate with the topic of user interface and design. And it was something that I thought I would try and revisit. Today's guest is someone that has obviously worked within the industry for a while and worked within his own company, doing great projects with massive clients all over the world, who specialize in user interface and user experience, amongst other things, and has gladly came on today to talk about what he does and why he does it. So today we are inviting onto the podcast Mr. Jason Schklar. Hey Jason, how's it going?
Hey, good to be here.
Fantastic. So we've had a bit of back and forth before we've recorded, and we've talked about things you've been up to, but you've kind of pitched it initially when we talked about doing the podcast as you're the quote unquote not an artist. So where did you come from that you ended up running a studio that specializes in user interface and user design? Is that something that has organically happened over the years, or was it something you had tried to make or manifest way back in the day and now has come to fruition?
It might be most interesting to start with why I'm not an artist. Like probably many kids in the early 70s, teachers were a lot more direct with their students. It was a lot less touchy-feely. And so I remember visually, like I can visualize it as I'm talking, me, your second or third grade, you have the piece of paper, you're just doodling.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my teacher, and she was amazing person. There was no malintent. She came over to me and she looks at me, and then she takes a black crayon and sort of goes around the edge of it to kind of give it some form. And then she shows me like how to like properly color so that it looks like not like a scribbly mess. And then it went from there. It went from there to I had to pick an elective between art and music. And I was like, well, I don't know that I have any inclination to either of them. This was in, we called it junior high at that, in our, where we are 7th, 8th grade. And I tried to give a little go at art, and I just compared myself to other people, and I just didn't have the patience or inclination. And so then I'll skip ahead because it's we don't have to go that far back. I'll skip ahead to grad school, where really my mode of creativity was writing. I wrote hundreds of thousands of words a year. It was in a science-based, research-based psychology. So how creative can it be? But for me, the creativity was in my brain, and expressing it in words was the way that I engaged in that process. I burnt out of that and then got into games. And what I found was this was when I started my UX journey, is that words aren't really, like, discussions of concepts are the quickest way to iterate and get really deeply understand an issue that you're facing, and then move forward with the creatives behind it, because they can sketch things out and draw things and make them look cool. And it was a big limitation for me, because I would always joke that I'd have like these scribbles on a napkin, essentially like, this is kind of what I'm going for. And what I realized then was it was actually easier for me to talk to people and have them do the sketching alongside, and usually just quick sketches. They never would want me to give them feedback on looks and graphics and things like that, because I'm that's the not me. And so I see, the artistry. I'm one of those folks who, even though I'm not, painting or modeling or anything like that, I do understand the creative process. I enjoy diving deep into the creative process. That flow is amazing. I just express it. And now, through my company, and there's lots of we can talk about origin of company or whatever.
Right.
Now the pure joy is, what was it was like I want to be the person beside Michelangelo handing them the paintbrush, right?
Right.
Like I want to make sure, I want to enable these amazing talents to do this work that blows people away, me included. And I want to provide an environment. I want to provide the tools. I want to provide the right projects so that they can just do amazing art. And so that's so in that very indirect way, but maybe enabling art is enough. That's how I've come around to realize that maybe if not an artist, I'm definitely art adjacent.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's always one of these things we've talked about with other art directors. You know, being privileged with this podcast and with networking to meet some people at the top of their game in big companies. And, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, sometimes art directors don't come from the art side of the project. Sometimes people just have that, which I think is the key skill you need to be one, is the communication, is the ability to cross between two departments and really connect those people with words and try and explain from left to right where you want to go with the project. And I think it's one of these things, people always get the idea that if I'm not a concept artist, if I'm not one of these big guys doing these huge illustrations for these companies, you know, I've never got a chance to lead in a project. And it's never been my experience. You know, a lot of people who come from different departments are not always art focused. They just have this idea of like a cohesion behold to the whole studio. Then, you know, like even you know, guys like Raf Grazzetti who came from the character art side of things and haven't maybe necessarily came from that traditional art background, but you know, have ended up leading coding teams and environment teams, you know, towards a common goal. So I think it's one of these things where, like, yeah, as long as you appreciate art and you have an understanding for, I think it's the eye, having the eye to judge when you look at something if it is what you're looking for or not, and how, why it's bad, why it's good. Taste essentially, I think, is what really leads. Taste and communication is what leads a project with an art director.
To sort of back that up a little bit, but it's kind of different. So for me, going from a solo to someone who can trust, right? I have to build that trust and that other people can deliver on my vision. Um, is that for me, making games is making games. It's not doing art, right? It's not
Right,
doing programming. You're making this game. And so for me, once I made sure that the directors in place were A, great communicators, but B, had shipped games and been in the thick of it, right? I have to, argue with the dev team about something that I really want. But more importantly, I have to be able to communicate with them, not in terms of what I need, but in terms of here's what I'm going for. What are you capable of? How do we
hmm,
do this in a way that will be performant, that will, we'll have enough time to do all the art? And then from the gameplay perspective, it's got to be playable, right? No one,
yeah,
people need to realize your art through play. And so what we found at UX is Fine is that as long as we have those folks in place, like we're the kind of place that hires people who haven't had their first job because they can't get a first job. We're the
right,
folks who hire folks like creatives out of school who maybe have never worked on a video game and maybe didn't even think of it as a path,
right,
who would never be able to work on a game on their own because they don't have that sensibility,
hmm,
but they've got communication style, they've got raw talent, the diamonds in the rough.
hmm,
And we know that our directors can, and they've got a passion for games, obviously. We
yeah,
know that our directors can steer them into the world of games and under what the design constraints are. And really, what differentiates us in some ways from other agencies is the fact that we aren't we want people to do their best art, but we integrate deeply into the pipelines of the other teams so that we're not designing for things that will never make it in game. And one of the catchphrases is, if it's not in game, did it ever really happen? Right.
right,
And that's obviously through the creative and editorial process, a lot of stuff gets left on the floor, and that's totally part of the process. But if the ultimate result that you're going for isn't in game, and by in game, prototyping, yeah, but also like production worthy, like I can actually produce this stuff and hit our targets and have it look the way it's intended. Um, it, you know, what are we doing?
yeah,
And the thing is that people can be talented, people can be passionate, but you need the folks ultimately, like you said, the communicators who can go in and really just help people understand the underlying issues and goals and then steer people towards executing on them. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's one of these things that I think it's, it's a very big divide within the games industry, within the art industry in general, is that whole 50-50 split of the people who just want to make art and the people who want to make games. You know what I mean? But it's like, I want to make the best drawing ever, the best character ever, the best whatever. And this person is also like, I want to make the best game. So I want to bring all these people together and make the best experience I possibly can for the end user. And I think I've always been more on the right hand side of it, where I want to make a game and want to be a leader in a team, because again, I think it's just I have beforehand, before I entered this industry, I was part of teams where I led teams and kind of had that flair for communication. But just because I'm so outspoken and I enjoy communicating, talking with people, it's part of the reason I do the podcast. And I have been, so successful in networking and meeting people all over the world, is because I'm not afraid to go up and speak to people and strike up a conversation and start talking about the industry, about life. But always, I think what people enjoy as well is the fact that I can have communication outside of the games industry and talk about, things going on in the world and politics and things going on at the other side of the wall. So yeah, so I think the thing I've found is, and it's interesting again, we're having this conversation for the first time, is that I have felt that way coming out of school, coming out of university. I'm 39 now, I'm 40 next year, and I left my previous job as an engineer to go back and train through university and put myself through art school. And when I came out in 2019, 2018, COVID was just happening, the world fell to bits. And then after COVID, obviously the layoffs. But, I've worked in 3D, I've worked in 2D, I've done a ton of game jams, organized all of those, designed levels, built stuff from the ground up. But when I knock on everybody's door, it's always, it's great that you can do all these things, but we need, the best illustrator, the best 3D modeler, the best, and it's harder, I think, in the bigger studios where you go to, knock on the doors of the big places, because they really need the specialization, which has been a dual thing with art directors. I've talked about how it's almost like building the decline of the game industry in a sense, because so many of those guys are tied up in projects, you can never get hold of them. But then it's also, they have this backlog of people that want to be in the game industry and work as juniors, but can't get through the front, because they don't have this specialization or this high level of skill. You're nodding your head. I'm assuming you're agreeing with most things I'm talking about here, Jason. Yeah.
as another segue, I've got a sort of deep voice, obviously,
Yeah.
and I would a lot of people sort of, especially when I was a little younger, maybe my voice was sweeter and better then. I don't know.
Yep.
They say, "Oh, you should do voice acting," and I'm like, "Oh, that must be easy work. Like that would be really cool."
Yeah.
And so I went and I took one of the little, you pay $25, you go in with 30 people who are the same, want to get an easy money through voice acting.
Right.
The teacher walks into the room, 5 minutes after the time, and he sort of puts down his, like, he's busy, and puts down his, it's clear he's come from another meeting or whatever. He's like ruffling through his stuff, and as he said, "I'm going to start in a minute, but oh, I got this opportunity that I don't know that I can fill. It doesn't pay anything,
Mm-hmm.
but if anyone's interested, just And then of course everyone, I didn't. I'd like to brag. Everyone puts up their hands, and he said that's the number one problem with voice acting as a career.
Right.
Everyone wants to do that because they think it's easy money. And the
Mm-hmm.
segue to that was, I actually thought I would take it seriously. And there's a fellow in the industry, and I apologize for blanking on the name, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
afterwards I can, if you do links or something, I'll give
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
link to his. He's a Hollywood actor. He was on Lost and all that sort of stuff. A really neat
Mm-hmm.
guy, very humble, from the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this deal where he said, "You'll sit down with me for half an hour. I'll decide whether you're coachable or not. If you're
Mm-hmm.
not coachable, you pay nothing."
Mm-hmm.
And you go on your merry way. And if you are, I'll prepare you a demo reel for whatever funding or whatever
Right.
money. And I won't waste your time. You won't waste my time.
Mm-hmm.
So I go and I knock on. I'm in LA to visit Activision. This was many, many years ago to consult. I was consulting on Tony Hawk Ride. Yes, I worked on Tony Hawk. And I've stopped by his place, and the most humble guy is an apartment. Like, I'm like, this is a TV star, and he's just like, "Hey, come on in." He's got Farmville up on his computer, and we sit down, and he starts to go through some things. Then he starts to give me some direction, and I'm useless, right? I'm like, I can't do whatever he's, I can be very emotive, obviously, and things like that, but that's expressing myself.
Yeah.
Um, and like 10 minutes go by, and he's like, "Yeah." I'm sorry, like you can't be directed. And so
Right.
this is not, either you have to go to acting school and maybe improve or whatever. And that
Hmm.
made me realize the whole, the acting part of voice. I digressed a little bit here because really the main point was what you talked about was supply and demand, right? We've got a lot of people willing to put themselves through the grinder,
Hmm.
work for insanely low fees, especially when you consider overtime, right? Your salary of $40,000 is essentially $20,000 based on the number of
Yeah.
hours you work, right?
Hmm.
Um, in terms of opportunity cost. And so, and this issue, it seems exacerbated now because I think there's much more talent in the market,
Hmm.
and there's fewer bigger games. But this was a big thing when I started. The first game that I kind of worked on, I was on the publisher side, but on the developer side, when I joined them as a developer at Big Huge
Hmm.
Games, this was tough because we were going to start to build a big budget game, right? And $25 million or something like that, and that meant
Yeah.
for the art pipeline all these folks who had handcrafted, they would take a character and they would own that character, texturing, modeling, rigging, animating, all that stuff.
Right to
Sometimes,
the end. Yeah.
they would work together to do a little more polish for the person who was better at that. But the
Yep.
model then was like, nope, it's an assembly line.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was, in 2002 or 2003, right? And
Yep.
now you've got these 700 person teams that, you've got to hit time and date, and there's really no chance to do anything other than that. And, you know, if you're, you kind of, for a lot of these projects, need to just throw bodies at a problem, and and people get chewed up. And that's why our philosophy at UX is Fine is very different. We've been able to be successful at it, but will we ever be able to grow? Will our model ever become a dominant model in the industry? I don't know. We're kind of just doing what we can and enjoying our success, but
Yep.
it is a lot of times, people are like, how do I get into the industry? And I really want, I'm like, do you love games? And they say yes. And I say, well, make sure you get yourself good career options, because if you have a job that you love other than games and you make decent money, you can play all the games you want, right? For enjoyment and satisfaction, and not have to put yourself through the grind that a lot of these places uh, do put you on. Now, at the same time, I would never tell someone don't work on your dream project, right? Like
Yep.
Valorant is a great example, right?
Yeah.
People want to work at Riot. We had an intern who came here and she caught our attention by doing a case study on Valorant while we were working on Valorant. And we knew she was going to go to Riot at some point, and that was fine.
Right.
And and then they get to experience what it's like being on a 300 person team where it's harder to have the kind of impact. And whereas on our team, right, we actually are brought in, we do production work as well,
Hmm.
but we're usually brought in where we can, as a small team, we can be part of that creative process. And they can touch multiple projects in a couple of years as opposed to one project every 4 years, right? Which might be a
Yeah.
sequel of the project they worked on for the previous 4 years. So
Yeah.
again, it's not like this scalable kind of thing. We've kind of found our place in the world,
Hmm.
but yeah, it can be a meat grinder out there.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing of working on multiple projects is a thing that I felt when I interned at Access Studios in Glasgow, because they, at the time, funny enough, when I was interning there, were working on a League of Legends short and the cinematics for Destiny 2 and a Netflix TV show, Happy, that aired way back in the day. So the people who were on those VFX teams and environment teams were getting to work on, they'd say, like, oh, I've worked with Riot Games, I've worked with Bungie, I've worked, within the space of a year, they've worked on multiple projects. So it is always good to fill your resume that way and then extend. I mean, it's difficult for me as well because it's always one of these mentalities of, especially from where I came from, that you used to find a job and work there forever. But now it's just not the case. People jump ship every other year. But it's difficult for me, I think, because if I found a place I really enjoyed and I had the opportunity to be there for the longest time, because I mean, even local to where I'm in Edinburgh, they have Rockstar North here who make Grand Theft Auto. And they have guys in there what they call lifers, so people who have been there since GTA 1, that have worked all the way through the last 20 years in the different projects. And are now about to launch like Grand Theft Auto 6, but started in a small office in Dundee in the middle of Scotland, doing a top down, 2D game. And look at it now, the biggest entertainment and environment in the world. But they have guys there that, like I said, that are called lifers and enjoy where they are, enjoy that team, want to keep making it. And I think they're in a unique position because Rockstar North have this unique thing where they have so much money. They can just take their time with games and have people there forever working and stuff because they're not really facing the same realities of business that most other places are with closures and layoffs and stuff. So, but like, yeah, it's one of these things where I just want to find, I've always said to people like, not that the money doesn't matter, and I've used this topic recently because I've took on some contract work and I said to the guy, look, I came from a really well paid engineering job and money was never my goal. It was always being part of something that was bigger than myself and finding my place in the world with other people who are in creatives that think like me, a family kind of atmosphere of people that I enjoy working with and going to day and day and having conversations with them. And, I obviously want to pay my bills and eat, but at the same time, I just want to make sure that I'm doing something that I feel like maybe when I'm not here, is going to be something that can be left behind as an example of something I touched with artistic intuition. And when I interviewed Ian McCaig, we kind of bonded over this saying of like, if I can leave the world just a bit brighter than I found it, I feel like I've done something right. Because Ian always laughed. He said, "That's what I say," and I say, "No, I say it too." So, but like, yeah, for me, I think building games is one of these things is that you try to be part of something bigger than yourself, and I think with UX is fine. That's kind of what you're aiming for, right? Is to be able to touch these different projects and make them all kind of individually good at the same time, with that whole team mentality. Is that
Yeah,
yeah?
that's what we try to do, and we compared to the rest of the industry, we kind of, well, we would consider it, if you look at it from an outsider's perspective, spoil our workers, 4-day work weeks, no crunch,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the pay is, we're a small business, so the pay,
Mm-hmm.
if you were well, it used to be, right, if you
Mm-hmm.
were like a top talent, you could get, the sky's the limit on how
Yeah.
much you make. Before COVID, we were always remote all the time anyhow, so the hope was we would find the amazing UXer in West Virginia who didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to leave his family and friends to go to the
Right.
West Coast to find a job. And like, yeah, you live wherever you are, you work with us. And that's just, it'll be a win-win, right? We can still charge affordable rates as a small company, but we can
Yeah.
also pay someone a great wage and they get the fifth day off and they don't have to crunch or what
Right.
have you. And so our kind of, I worry sometimes, especially at the beginning where, I'd be working with interns or mentoring people and I'd be, on the one hand, I'd be like, I'd love the fact that I'm raising the bar in terms of what their expectation, in terms of their personal value and the space that they need and the mental sort of health and support. Um, but the reality is that we can only, employ, 20 to 40 people at once and give them that experience. And so, my hope is that they can use that as a bar where they can make some choices. But
Yeah.
then when your choices are kind of restricted, then you don't. And for me, I'm very much in the world of, if someone leaves us for a different job, I'm happy for them because everyone is happiest when they're looking out for their own self interest. I don't mean selfish, but I mean I need the job that I want, working on the projects that I want, making the money that I want to
Yeah.
support my own goals.
Yep.
And also people leave and come back, right? Like that's the thing too. They forget that, like, oh, working on a huge team on a huge game, even if it's a company I love, like I would never begrudge any of our juniors, and juniors ignore this if I say that, but really, no, I won't begrudge you.
Yeah.
I've played Valorant since I was a teenager. I want to,
Right.
Riot has an opportunity. I want to join. I'm like, yeah, I worked at Microsoft Games. Like it was cool. I joined Big Huge Games. I worked at
Yeah.
Disney. I worked, like
Mm.
pursuing those dreams, I wouldn't begrudge anyone for doing. And
Of
then,
course.
either they'll love it and not get laid off ever when the game ships, or they'll realize that there's other ways to make a game and be part of the industry and maybe come on back.
Yeah, and I think that's it's I'm not a conversation where I'm trying to pitch myself here, Jason, but I think I'm in a unique position where the age I am, right, and being in somewhere like Scotland, where like I think it's almost seen as, especially in America, I think people see it as a third world country. It's still a United Kingdom where they have great places to work, but Americans and American studios kind of think of that whole thing about, it still is a way across the ocean. You've got to get a visa to get people across. And then when you bring them across and get a visa, it's a whole thing of like, is it worth the money? Is it worth the cash to, sponsor someone and get them across here and tick all the boxes and get them across, and that for a lot of companies is a big decision, unless you're talking about like an incredible talent, someone who's already doing incredible things in their own space, and you want them to be part of that team in Los Angeles or New York or whatever, in the States. And then it's a question of like, well, sure, we can get this person on board because they've worked on this or they've worked on. But when you're a relatively unknown person, it's easier to get those remote gigs because then it's like, well, we just have to send things via email. Like my client right now is in Los Angeles, and I just send them an FBX or a 3D file, via email or Discord. Sometimes it just depends, but it's way easier than it used to be, where you used to have to, set up an online drive system and then dump stuff in the drive and hope they get it at whatever rate. But yeah, because internet here is great as well, and we have gigabit Ethernet and stuff and that, and so we don't have some of the problems. But like, yeah, it has been a case now. I can work with these studios in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, in Santa Monica, and I just send them files overnight, and then I wake up the next day and I've got feedback, and then onto the races again. But like, yeah, it's harder for younger artists, I think, who are in half my age or in their 20s and leaving school, and they want to go work at, like you said, Riot, Blizzard, these other big games, Activision, Microsoft, Bungie, 343, whatever it is, and then go into that grinding system where, yeah, you might go there and have a great career, but you might work on something for a couple of years, and then there might be a shift, and then the game gets cancelled and you're laid off. So um, I think when I see the world with my eyes where they're older, it's difficult to see the benefits now of moving to somewhere like LA or somewhere like a big studio in the Americas, because excluding recent events, obviously, but also the fact that, like, that just I was speaking to someone, I run a Discord as well. I run, I run Control G, and I have people in there, 2,000 members, and recently when the Blizzard layoffs happened, I had two people or three people in the chat one night, and one of the women I was talking to had just moved from South America to work in a studio job at Blizzard in Irvine, and when she got laid off, it was basically she needs to find something quick or she's going back. So it's the harsh reality that you've experienced for the years you've worked in those places, but now because you're on your own place, you're trying to give that a wide berth. I'm assuming you're trying to make, like you said, I think you were covering. Did you say you guys work a 4-day week as well, or yeah, which is great, which is brilliant. Yeah.
For contractors, if they want to pick up, mostly we work with contractors, so that's how we deal with the international as well. We don't have
Mm-hmm.
a footprint internationally yet,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that we're evaluating kind of strategically. But we can like talk about the global economy more. But the 4-day
Mm-hmm.
work week is mission critical for us. It created a lot of problems, but it also solves a lot of problems.
Right.
One is we can't have meetings. We can't have very many meetings. We
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to pick up the phone and when we're we need to do a quick riff or anything like that. But we just don't have enough time in the week to have meetings. And guess what? Creatives hate meetings, and so right. And now it's like you don't have the people, the decision makers, and we have a fair amount of autonomy here, but you do have gates and decision makers.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to wait for a meeting till the end of the day because they have meetings all day, right? It's,
Right.
hey, what's up? Jump on a Discord channel or something. Let's chat.
Yeah.
So that helps. That helps there a lot. And this is creative. Like if you're doing the heavy lifting for 4 days in a row,
Mm-hmm.
if you're it'll be clear if you're not doing your heavy lifting right during those 4 days, but your
Yeah.
brain needs a rest to come back on that Monday
Mm-hmm.
and be refreshed and creative and ready to go. And we just we don't do like evening happy hours like our holiday week, even though we have different time zones, but we try to have it during work hours where it's paid
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. We just there's the whole, are you family or not? And we're like, we're a bunch of people who respect each other. And the way we respect each other mostly is time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Time is the one thing that is most precious that, there's a lot of other things you'd rather spend your time doing than sitting in another meeting or doing a ping pong game after work with folks. Now, maybe,
Especially if you have kids,
maybe
a
like,
partner,
yeah,
all that kind of.
I
Yeah.
remember being super resentful when I started at Microsoft because I didn't start a family until late. I was 30 then. I went to grad school and kind of burned out and then joined in. Actually, a bunch of my cohort did. And
Mm-hmm.
the people with kids would like, it's 5 o'clock hits and they're on the bus back. And I'd
Right.
be like, what the heck? Like, how do they, that's not, and then I realized, not till 20 years later or whatever, that
Mm-hmm.
I had it all backwards, that the that people are happiest and best and most productive when they're allowed to choose what they want to do with their non-work time. And
Yep.
just because I would stick around later and game or maybe finish up work, like
Right.
they were just as productive as me.
Yeah.
They just made sure they did it during the workday,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so it's really, treating that fundamentally. And there's a lot of people who can't work at our company because of that, not because they're flawed as individuals or whatever, but that's where they thrive. I feel
Mm.
bad for some of the junior people who maybe are looking for a sense of community and camaraderie at work. But on the other side, maybe this is, and at least for the people we have, it seems to be they have other busy social lives that they engage in outside of work, and long
Yeah.
term maybe that's healthier because we're not in the same job forever anymore, as you
Yeah.
know. And the no crunch thing, as well, is important to us because Dave, my co-founder, and I, we worked in the game industry for him for almost 3 decades, for me for
Mhm.
20 plus years, but at least half of mine have been consulting or building a company on my own. But we've built games and we know the like crunch and the stress and things like, and we were just like, we're kind of done with that. Like that's
Mhm.
just not. And as we do more and more full services, we have people now asking us like, "Do you want to make games for us?" And I'm like, "Hell no." And Dave's also like, "Hell no."
Mhm.
But then we've got folks in here and we're doing some more limited scope games and things like that and smaller scale. And I'm like, well, as long as we can do it in a way where we don't crunch and we have expectations with our clients that are set appropriately and they're willing to
Yeah.
abide by those, then why not?
Yeah, I
So,
mean, like, honestly, it's one of these things me and my friend have been talking about recently because we were talking about doing a card game, essentially, a kind of roguelike card game builder.
oh yeah, we love
Yeah.
those here.
Or Hearthstone, like I have a lot of good buddies in the Hearthstone team, and also the guys who left Hearthstone and started Marvel Snap, and like the whole thing of like a lot of those games are basically UI, or the whole thing is UI, right? So it's one of these things where this right game comes along, you could definitely build something with a UI team, because like you said, you also hire illustrators, guys who do really amazing drawing stuff. So yeah, and it's been a goal of mine for a long time as well. As much as I've talked about the journey into stuff that UI and UX is doing, having my name on a card at one point, for any of the big kind of, the big three or the big four, depending how many, are here right now. I think what's the recent thing I've started playing as well, the Disney Lorcana, that's kind of, took on a whole life of his own. Try to play that now recently as well, which is the Disney card game. But there is so many card games now, that you could essentially, as an illustrator, work forever on just doing illustrations for these games. But yeah, building games like that, yeah, because it's funny actually. I remember going to the Blizzard offices in 2019 when I got to visit them, and seeing the Hearthstone. They have up on the wall the initial sketches of like when you die in the Hearthstone game, the explosion that happens. All that was just penciled out basically by Jamado and the team, and a couple other guys, and then it was built in VFX later. But to see how a lot of this stuff starts with just a pencil and a sketch and a bit of paper and laying out where will the cards sit, where does your life counter sit, where's the board going to be, what are the edges, um, even the fact that the game boards, it's like they built the whole experience like you're sitting in Warcraft in the world at the taverns with the board in front of you, putting cards down. So yeah, I definitely feel like that if you wanted to cross into that realm, it's not unrealistic to think that you could make something that's functional, right?
Well, yeah, but the magic comes with the systems design and the programming that makes it all run
Right.
smoothly. And
Yeah, of course.
so, but yes, and that's the part that like getting that right
Mhm.
just takes a lot of effort and iteration and polish, and people usually don't budget that in.
Right.
I did user research. That's where I started my career. So
Mhm.
observing people playing games,
Mhm.
and then giving feedback to the team. And I went into my first playtest ever that I was going to run. It was a usability test for big, huge games on Rise of Nations.
Mhm.
And I went into my boss's office and I'm like, I'm so nervous.
Mhm.
Like, what if I don't find anything, or what if it's totally useless or whatever. We're gonna waste whatever, like a couple $1,000s with recruiting fees and all that. And my boss turned to me and he's like, well, actually, it's like, you're all the opportunity costs of doing it. Then if they actually build something that's based on like, you know, information that's like not actually reliable or whatever, could cost them weeks of development for, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And
Yep.
I'm like, oh, okay. And now I flip that on its head, right? I'm like, this is the way you save potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, is you actually
Right.
do some of these investigations. But what I had to work with teams on, again, this is why I love to build games, and building games is a thing, is okay, how do I work with production to let them know that, like, we need a little time to think about this before we get the build that we're going to test with?
Hmm.
How do I get the dev team to be iterating on the build during that time? So having time for that. How do we make sure that the backlog actually can get included in a way where we have time budgeted to do the improvements we can't do during the week?
Right.
And that's the kind of, thing that sort of goes on with. So, and to bring it back right to the game, deck building game, right? That's the kind of work that just, it's the, the all that extra effort, because all I do and all UX does is
Hmm.
create more work items, right? And so if you believe in it and you're like, yeah, this is the way to really make the game better, then all of a sudden you've taken on a lot more work to do.
Yeah.
And if you don't plan for it, uh, then you can't do it, or you can do only some of it. And so that's never a good place. So, we had dev teams who would just, the 20, 30 people making these AAA at the time titles that were just
Yeah.
working impossible weeks to get it all done.
Yeah.
So, um,
I mean, the schedules for all these things are ridiculous. I mean, I think the thing that I've found that has been negative about stuff like Hearthstone is the fact that it's kind of driven by profit now, in the sense that they try to get, like, three or four, five, six, seven, however many they get out a year expansions. And it's that thing of when you build it in those games, it's like that constant rolling thing of having to make content constantly all the time, loads and loads and loads and loads of cards. I mean, it's one of these things that I think if you build a good team and you build the right team, then you can get these things delivered. But it can get lost in that aim of capitalism. But then I think it's one of these things why, like, if we move on to now, like, why you built the company you did, was it just a thing of like building that backbone of the years of experience you had, and then outsourcing work, and then it was started with like one outsourcer. A lot of the guys I know who build these companies, they start as a concept artist, but then they do a project where they bring a friend on, and them and the friend, they do the project, they work really well together. Let's do another project together, but then it's like the next one needs maybe another extra person, so they bring another person on. By the end of it, you've got 10 people that you're all working on one thing for, and you call a people in a room in an office a different name, and then you're a company. All of a sudden, you're a freelance, you're a gun for hire kind of studio. Is that kind of how it was built? Like, was that the consciousness behind it, or was it something else that happened?
so I did consulting twice in my career. One is I burnt out in the games industry. I joined Amazon, not at games. This was 2007, 2008. I was brought in
Right,
because of my games experience, because they were trying to work on sort of gamified um, experiences, basically things that would increase engagement and retention on the site, so people would have reasons to return. Kind of,
right,
we didn't nail it then, but you got the New York Times, LinkedIn, and other, that have their games that are driving engagement and daily returns.
right.
And so that was a drop ship model for me. I was mostly doing user research, because what had happened since 2001 is that everyone decided, all the big publishers realized, oh shoot, we need this, but we haven't had the funding to build big departments yet. So you need people like me to come in and be drop shipped in. And because I had experience, I'd worked top teams and come from Microsoft, they'd be like, okay, Jason, you go in and fight these fires, figure out how to do the testing, how to help them improve the games and things like that. And that
Hmm.
was I was in a good spot there. I was also single, just starting to date my current wife at the point. We lived really frugally, and
Yeah.
I could do the, work half the hours and make more money than I was making before. And that's lovely. And then I had two kids, and I sort of like realized that, like, consulting is cool,
Hmm.
but it might be unpredictable. And I had two main clients at the time. It's been long enough. One of them was Zynga, and one of them was 38 Studios, and I knew them through Big Huge Games. So I would have been working directly through Big Huge Games on
Right.
Reckoning, which was then Kingdoms of Amalur.
Like I say,
It
Zynga
was a
are they're a quite huge company in themselves, just with the mobile stuff
Yeah,
they
yeah.
do
Well,
as
they were
well.
just growing. I joined in the period of the Facebook games, right, where I didn't get the fancy cars and houses, but I got like half of my house paid for. Like Zynga I joined just after the crazy days, right?
Right.
But they're my two main clients, and thankfully, I had good friends at Big Huge Games. When I was trying to use leverage, right, get one to bid against the other, get the highest salary possible, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And my friends at 38, well, Big Huge Games that had just been
Hmm.
acquired, they were like, don't come here. It was before the implosion, but I think they
Yeah.
could see it coming. And in
Yeah.
Zynga, the money was great, and I knew that Brian Reynolds had created a Zynga East studio, so a Baltimore-based studio, which is where I was living. And I knew that I could work with Brian and the team, and I would have fun. And we did Frontierville. I mean, they did it. I did some UX stuff related to it. And then when it became successful, they could just grab me from Zynga and offer me a full-time job and keep me on full-time. And then
Mhm.
I had kind of a cushy time of it because my kids were young, and we were just like there, a lot of the UX stuff once you go live was just being ignored, right?
Mhm.
Like it's just like we're just going to get content cadence going, and we're going to do price. This was the heyday of price sensitivity of quests, and we had no idea that people would pay 40, 50, $60 to collect a horseshoe that would unlock
Right.
a chance to do another quest where you would unlock a horseshoe. so
The Horse
so
Armor
there was
DLC
really
days. Yeah.
yeah. So at least these days you have quality content possible in DLC and
Yeah.
things like that. But then it was, it wasn't the same way. And
Yeah.
this will get into my sort of consulting bit in building the company. What happened was I became so disillusioned with working on live games, uh, as did Brian. Brian was sort of, Brian is Brian, so they would want him to go around to all the different studios and give feedback and touches. I just started palling around somehow or other. It worked with him and visiting these various studios and going in from a UX perspective and
Yep.
helping folks out. I wouldn't do as much of the research, but helping them with the UX direction. And these were all games in development. So
Mhm.
before live launch, and that was fun. You get to work with these creative teams, solve interesting problems, try to actually make the game fun and things like that. And I love that. But that also meant that I finally got out of my first degree bubble was Microsoft and big huge games related, which is pretty small bubble. Here, Zynga had like gobbled up right
Yeah.
massive amounts of industry talent from all sorts of studios and previous publishers. So my network, because I was working with various teams, started to obviously increase, and
Mhm.
it led me to believe that I could probably do a successful consulting thing. I didn't do that right away. I left Zynga, sort of the classic uh, Bruckheimer walk out of the flaming building. Like I left like 3 days before they closed the studio down. I should have waited those 3 extra days to get the severance as well, but I left for Disney at that time. I
Right.
knew my studio was going to get shut down.
Right.
And Disney was the first place after, I don't know, 15, 16 years where they closed down the studio and we got laid off. And
Mhm.
that's when I decided to go consulting again because I had family then. And I'm like, I'm not moving to the West Coast. I was in Austin at the time. It's too expensive. I don't want to move the family.
Right.
So I'm going to give myself a year to see if I can rebuild the consulting business. And if I can't do it, I'll just get a job, right? Whatever
Right.
that job is. And I was very niche. People to amortize my cost would want me to work on multiple games at once in the sort of direction. I didn't lead teams. I came in as sort of like a design director type for the studios and
Mhm.
help that way. And what I realized quickly is that user research was no longer going to be the thing for me.
Mhm.
Why? Well, because in the 10 years in between, all the big studios with the money had staffed up. They
Mhm.
built their own full time org, and relying on that, they were kind of talking about some of these contractors in the art world. Right now, you just plugged into like I could get contracting work, of course, with my background, but I didn't want to do contract work and just run studies for people, right? That would
Right.
not pay the bills and also be a big downer because I actually didn't like running studies. I liked having people run them and figure out the problems and work with the teams to improve the games.
Yeah.
So I moved more into the UX role, and where that was the um, just through reputation, people are like, yeah, we're early on, we can't find the fun, or we're soft launching, or we're friends and family, and people can't figure out how to play, or our metrics aren't where they need to be. Call Jason, right? And Jason would be the person who'd come in, and I'd do two main things, and I'll quickly transition into how the team got built.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was the one part was okay, we've got a limited time and budget. There's a million things we could try. What are three things that we can afford to do that will give us the best chance to move the needle?
Mhm.
Oftentimes there was no really say. I mean, I've worked on hundreds of
Mhm.
games that never saw the light of day or launched for a minute, right? And I asked one of my clients at that point, I'm like, you could, for my consulting fee for a few days a month or whatever, you could hire another 2D artist, right? Not because I was charging so much money, but 2D artists, they have very reasonable salaries.
Yeah.
And I said, why do you hire me in for that? And he said, well, I believe that you can help my D1 if I believe you can help my D1 return retention by a couple of points, right, and help them stick around for help over the course of D15, maybe a point, then all of a sudden, like that ROI of the spend on you is huge because user acquisition costs are so expensive. So if I can make the $1 million I'm spending on user acquisition worth $1.2 million, then it's paying you $50,000 or whatever the total amount was is like no brainer, right, to them. And I'm like, that started me thinking about the business, right? Because I really had to start focusing on the business. And then what happened is a lot of people came to me and they're just like, okay, like I came to you for UI UX. I realized that's not what I needed, like an artist or whatever. And your consulting is amazing. Can you do UI? Can you do wireframes? Can you make things look pretty? Can you? And I'm like, no, I can't do any of that really. I could try to do wireframes, but they'd be horrible, and you'd be paying a lot of money to go slowly. So that's
Yeah.
where I started to layer on different people to sort of try to provide alternate, additional services.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that point that I met. I was working on a project with Backflip. My One of my co-founders, there's three of us co-founders. So Neil, who's not with the company anymore, he's building his own board games and his own video games as well. But he's got, again, if you have links at the end, I'll send a link to his Kickstarter. It was hugely overfunded. It looks like a really fun, cozy game. So he's doing that now. But he was brought on to do UX design, and my co-founder Dave had been doing, game design for a while, needed a break, and he wanted to be a hobby job, and he wanted to be quality of life, and he wanted to not care about a whole game, but he really liked iconography, fonts, and things. And so we started as a 3-person team on really crappy projects. But every year we were able to double in revenue, which again wasn't that much back then, but it was enough to keep us busy. And then we'd add another person or two, and then we became a thing. And then it's more around 2020, 21 is when we started to like be a thing together where we could offer these different services. And really, it was very organically driven at first. And for me personally, what I realized is the whole fantasy of working half the time and earning the same amount of money wasn't going to build the kind of wealth long term for me to retire, maybe help
Right.
send my kids to college and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started taking it seriously as a business. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where the hardest transition for me was like getting out of the craft and building the business that was now my craft. And it took a long time for me to come. I wouldn't hire people, right? Because I'm like, no one can do this aspect of it as good as I can or whatever. And it
Mm-hmm.
was, but now we've got like everyone at the company can do it better than me. So now I just don't even do that part anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I've had to come to terms with, well, is and probably why initially I didn't want to do it while I was studying, because while I was studying my degree, I run a graphic design firm, like just out of like a spare office close to where I live. And I hired like 2 people basically that were wanting to work for like not a great amount of money, but basically I didn't take a wage, and every piece of money I ever got, I put in their pocket and paid them. But it was a good, just I thought, experience. But the problem I found is that the more I run the business, the more I was chasing clients, going to meetings, going to client meetings, back and forth, and I wasn't getting to do anything creative. And I kind of felt like at this point, I don't want to just run a business. I want to finish my degree, get some experience, and maybe down the line do that. But at the moment, I don't. But then, like, I run it for 6 months to a year, pretty successfully. Like, I had like 15 people at the time that were getting prints off me. I was designing stuff for them. It was mostly like shop front, small businesses, stuff like that, iconography. So it wasn't anything huge. But I did run it off my own back in between going to university as well and finishing my degree. So but yeah, it was the whole thing of like, meetings about meetings, emails about emails. I was getting to a point I was just sick of like doing all that stuff. And at one point I think I missed a class for one of my morning classes, and I kind of came to a point I was like, what am I doing? Like I'm sacrificing my degree here. Like I really want to get this finished. So the 2 guys that were working for me, I gave them recommendations and said to the guys, if you want to take over the business and keep doing it. So that's what they done. And I stepped out, and they aren't doing it anymore. They're doing their own thing now. But like, yeah, like it was a thing of like just the idea of like running the business was something really hard, where they don't really talk about in the art industry how to do business sides of things. And that's where people really struggle to either go freelance or run their own thing because they haven't had that experience or that mentorship for running businesses. And like, yeah, it must have been a bit of a head scratcher initially to try and get all that set up, and contracts and all the paperwork stuff, admin stuff that you don't really want to do as a creative, but as a necessity to, especially in America with taxes and stuff. You really need to make sure you're on the ball with all that stuff, and even at one point hiring accountants for firms and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, it definitely has been a bit of a pain, but hopefully you're in a better place now, right? You guys are a bit smooth in the machinery, like everything's kind of working as it should now, and you guys are in a good place, I hope.
We've got amazing. So we have a director of operations here who does she started on more doing the books, but as we grow, her role has
Expanded.
encompassed more and more,
Mm-hmm.
and she loves doing that stuff, and she's great with the people here because there's the HR part, there's the books part, and then she
Mm-hmm.
helps overall with production, with
Mm-hmm.
projections, budgeting. And we're still a small company, but that is pretty much mission critical. Like all of our directors, she's one of our directors. We have their creative directors, director of UX, director of engineering, but she is a director that, even though we're not billing her out, is like the value add is humongous just to take on those things. And then
Yep.
so we are pretty well oiled, but where we need to be planning 2 to 5 years down the road is
Mm-hmm.
I need to start, all those things that I needed to do before Kat came in and did all these things. Now with the sales part, right, it still takes up a little bit too much of tactical time of mine where I need to be planning for, we've got challenges, right? We've got,
Mm-hmm.
and they're scary existential challenges, or they're opportunities to take advantage of. And so for me, also, I get bored of doing the same thing over and over again. So I like the new challenge. So this is something that works to my strength as well. And so I wouldn't say we're well oiled for a machine that is running hot, even though our people aren't running hot. We're like, as a small company with multiple projects,
Yep.
we are, we're juggling
At
a lot of
capacity.
balls on the director level,
Yeah.
and making it work. But we're planning to grow, and we've got enough demand to grow, and then so we
Mm-hmm.
have to somehow figure out how to grow with it. So we'll have more growing pains to come, I'm sure. But it definitely, because our folks from the top down are so autonomous and invested in the company, that things just kind of get done, which is a lot of my worry because
Mm-hmm.
originally the company was me, right? It was my
Mm-hmm.
face, my reputation. I've got a big network of folks, and I wasn't able to trust, essentially. And
Mm-hmm.
all these folks, not only do they buy into the vision, they see where we're going, and they're like super excited about it. But they don't need to be told how to contribute and all that sort of stuff. They are already thinking for themselves. And this is from, the people who just started the company to
Yep.
started at the company to the more
Mm-hmm.
senior people who've been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps a bunch because it's a lonely job if someone needs to own marketing or someone needs to own, eventually we'll need that because we just need the
Mm-hmm.
expertise and the bandwidth, but we
Yep.
don't need that now. And people just step up and step in, and do it, which is amazing.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things that I think is been my strength for many years, but it's been the same. It's been difficult for all other companies as the jack of all trades, because I've done, apart from art side and creative side of it, I've also, like I said, led people, but I've also done some marketing for some people. I've done some community stuff. Like I've hired people. I've went out and tried to find talent. So it's one of these things that I think small companies are the good part of what makes the industry, because I think where the downfalls came has been these 600-700 people teams where your vision kind of gets lost in the crowd of people that is departments, and you're not really having those one-to-one conversations anymore. You're now having, meetings with departments who then need to pass to other departments. And, I think it's one of these things, you talk about how you're running hot, but you've managed to survive in what has been basically the apocalypse of the games industry recently, where people have been laid
Vultures,
off. And
man. We're
yeah,
the cockroaches and vultures of the industry. COVID unlocked so many doors for us in
yep,
terms of just practical. We couldn't work with the biggest studios because we weren't co-located with fingerprint sensors and video cameras and everything.
right, yeah,
But COVID meant that all the big publishers and developers sent everyone home and figured out security, infosec, and
yep,
security. So it's like there is definitely survivor's guilt,
mhm,
but it did operate. And then the chaos of last year, people were already moving to the model of, people had for a while been doing, traditional outsourcing, which you find the cheapest house that has 1,000 engineers or 1,000 artists, and you can get it done super cheaply, and they just hand you the stuff back or whatever. But the model that people were starting to adopt, even just before COVID, was
Mhm.
the find a few trusted codev partners who will be with you for a long time, so I never have to hire up that department. And that works for a couple of reasons. One is, you can keep your overall budget smaller. You can build the game small and not have high risk of people idling or too many people on the team. UX UI is a specialty where getting the right people and the right fix and the right experience is a hard thing to hire for. Having only one UXer is like a lot. It's adding the second UXer more than doubles what you can do, right? Especially with
Yeah.
confidence. And you don't have to announce big layoffs when the game ships, because part of the business model is we just go away, right?
Yeah.
So it worked on so it was already building, and then last
Mhm.
year, right, once the initial, like, oh my gosh, chaos settled down,
Mhm.
we knew that we wouldn't likely run a profit last year, but we needed to keep the doors open because we believed that games still need to be made. And studios aren't going to hire up full time right away, and they've got projects that need to ship, and so we're going to be there for them. And that's kind of what happened. And last year was a blip, but this year has been kind of stronger than ever because um, our reputation has improved, and the demand for our services has increased.
Right.
um, so that's been, our I do have survivor's guilt, uh, but it has sort of proven an interesting model, and sort of it's validated the kind of vision that we had,
Mhm.
which has been pretty cool.
Yeah. And then the thing is, looking forward, because, I hear some people in the industry using the phrase survive to 25. It's one of these things that people are talking about is, what is the beyond for you now? Like, you have so many years now of UX running, and you think to yourself, where are we going next? You talked about the international market, like, me being here in Scotland and the UK. Like, are you trying to then build a team that's kind of like a UX team, or like your home base you have now, you're trying to replicate that in the other side of the world? Or are you trying to like open offices other places? Or do you think that you're still going to be remote, kind of all the way through what you're doing?
Oh, there's a few things going on that can be looked
Don't
at
give
as
away any company secrets, obviously.
No, this is just general kind of thing. So there's a few
Yeah.
things going on that are existential threats to a business that just wants to try to run the same way. And
Right.
then there's huge opportunities. So let's start with the opportunities first.
Hmm.
So we're expensive compared to, a lot of other shops. We're not the most expensive, but we're pretty expensive because we're
Yeah.
niche specialized. You don't need to hire us through the whole life. Like, there's a lot of reasons why
Yeah.
we're expensive.
Yeah.
Um, but in the long run, still save our clients money because there's overhead and all that other stuff that they don't need to pay for. Plus, it's all about risk management. They know we can do the job. They bring us in. We do the job.
Yeah.
Um, but we can make games right now on those budgets for a few 100 million people, right? Who have high end PCs or consoles and who have the money to spend on these games. There's
Right.
7 billion other game players out there that we can't profitably work with.
Hmm.
Well, that means that we are not working on things that people here are also passionate about, indie games, smaller indie games. We're not
Right.
working on, like, there's 1.2 billion people in India, and there's a thriving game market of interesting and different games. Like, a lot of them are the same, but then they have, like, there's lots of interesting opportunities to build games for all these different markets. Okay,
Yeah.
so we can't do that currently. Well, that's gone from, oh dang, like, shucks,
Hmm.
but we get so much money coming in, like,
Hmm.
that's a first world problem, right? Well, that the existential threats now are the race to the bottom in pricing, right? Like,
Right.
the answer is it used to be you charge more for engineers than for artists, but we're actually kind of at the reverse right now. And we do
Right.
UI artists specifically, so we can charge more for that.
Yeah.
Um,
Quite
and
rightly
and
so.
so
Also.
I
Yeah.
I don't know. I love I mean, without our engineers, the magic can't happen, right? So,
No, of course, but no, people. I think
but
artists were so underappreciated for a long time
well,
as well.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah,
But now engineers are underappreciated because people believe you can just, farm a lot of that out, and it has been shown to work effectively, and there is a really positive impact. I do a lot of consulting and advising,
hmm
more sorry, advising and mentoring of international studios, and we learn
Mm.
so much from them, and the cultures are vibrant, and we're not taking advantage of them to the fullest in
Yeah.
terms of partnerships. And so there's a race to the bottom in pricing in
Mm.
engineering now, but that'll happen to UI, UX, and everything else, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, it's it's not necessarily just the race to the bottom in pricing and things like that. Like I see the opportunities here. Unfortunately, you kind of alluded to the whole, mess of capitalism and how the markets affect the industry and the people working in it.
Yep.
Um, who are going to be the haves and have-nots when you're using LLMs and Gen AI? Because you need you still need well-educated people who can communicate. Like for me, when I'm working in Gen AI, it's usually to do like boring RFPs or things like that, just to get some riffing. And I've become more of an editor than a writer later in
Right.
life. But also, I'm a scientist at heart, and
Mhm.
so I know not to just trust the text to come out. I know how to ask probing questions to see where the data are coming from. Are we skewing some way or the other? Are we ignoring some information? And so for me, it's like I'm almost teaching a graduate student, and to me, that's exciting, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, does that now mean that, I need fewer actual people to
Mhm.
do some of the work?
Mhm.
Or how do these people train themselves? Like what kind of education and training do they need to succeed in this kind of world?
Mhm.
And but for me, it's easy to see the utility of it all, but it also means there's going to have to be some sort of transformational shift in terms of how people who work on projects do their day to day,
Yeah.
and what skills they need to bring to the project other than their creative. It's something that you see with the ageism in the industry too, where folks who've been doing things for a long, long time, um, it's they have so many tremendous skills, but not all of them are as valued anymore. And how do they transition to other types of skills, especially in a world where the reason why they've been around forever is they love their craft and they
Yeah.
just want to be craftspeople.
Yeah.
In the games industry, the only job security that you have and way to ensure that you can retire at some point is really to own the means of production, like to go back to you know, cast off your change. The only have to change. The only thing you have to lose is your freedom, or is
Mhm.
your, I can't remember it's from Marx, or, I can't,
Yeah.
or Engel, I can't remember one of them. But the idea is that having that kind of ownership, it used to be you'd have ownership in terms of maybe a pension or some sort of social contract with the
Mhm.
company that was employing you and making the profit off of you. But for me, after so many years in the games industry, I kind of realized once I got into the consulting part and the business part that the only way that I can retire as again, I'm not like a stellar artist or anything like that,
Mhm.
where there's value in some of that craft, is
Mhm.
to build a company and build value that way.
Yep.
And so now with these new challenges, it's like, how do I continue to build value so I can employ
Mhm.
great people who I want to employ? And that to me is, almost always uh, been exciting to me. I remember, I'll digress for another 30 seconds or
Digress
so,
all
and
you
then we can
want.
get back to it. So when we talked about like how organically we started with like one or two people or whatever.
Yep.
So it used to be, that I would get paid by my clients net 30-ish, and there were smaller jobs, so there was no like payment up front or anything like
Mhm.
that. It was handshake. I didn't even sign contracts for a lot of these things. So they would pay me maybe net 30,
Mhm.
and then I would have to have the bank. So I would promise my people net 30 after net 30. So these
Right.
folks are, waiting sometimes 60 days for the work to get. So it's not ideal. And I remember when we first turned the corner and were able to do, twice a month paychecks, right? You
Mhm.
get paid twice a month and the billing is on us.
Mhm.
We have enough cash flow to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then I remember a huge milestone for me was the first six-figure payroll, right? The first time I'm like, wow, we're kind of here, right?
Yeah.
We are a company that can self-sustain, that can give people places to work and employ them, give them their benefits and things like that. And for me, that's like, the more we pay out, the better, right? Because that means we're doing better if we're able to pay out more. So that's the way that I sort of look at that, and so I want to be able to continue to do
Doing
that,
that.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of even put your mind at ease, because I think I'm kind of in the thick of it at the moment. Like, I'm part of a group who put together the funding for the initial venture, where people like Carl Ortiz and Steven Zapata went to Congress, in Washington, and spoke on Gen AI and why it was bad, and why it was the way, and why ChatGPT and places like that were taking advantage of artists and not paying them. A lot of data scientists I've listened to, because I listen to scientists as well. I subscribe to a lot of newsletters for science. A lot of AI, specifically scientists, computer scientists, are saying, there's a small minority who are saying, like, we're on the verge of I forget the specific name for it, but the AI that's self conscious, we're on the verge of that in the next couple of years. But there's some people who have wrote books on the matter who are like, we're probably like 100 years from that still. Like, it still isn't anywhere near like where it should be. And on the Gen AI side of it, a lot of people are talking about how basically from Silicon Valley it's a gimmick. It's something that they're trying to sell the public that they need. Every phone now you see that comes out has some AI capability. Apple Intelligence is a thing now, which is basically Chat GPT on an iPhone. But like, it is, a lot of it is just tech gimmicks and a way for to scare people into thinking that they need a new phone or they need a new laptop with AI in it. And AI, as you and I know, has existed in computers, and since the dawn of computers, there has always been some form of artificial intelligence. But the sequencing intelligence, the language learning stuff that is now coming on, is the new stuff. But from the models that are built at the moment, even with stuff like ChatGPT on 4.0 when it is just now, it's still not as accurate as it can be. It can sometimes suffer from misinformation, or make things that are just not cohesive in what you need it to do. And again, with Gen AI, it is the perpetual snake eating its tail, in the sense that it can regurgitate stuff, but it can't make anything new. It isn't at the point yet where it can push out something that is unique, in a sense that it has thought through a design process and made something that solves a problem. So I still see that, like, I think for at least the next 20 years, the industry isn't going to change in that direction. Like, it's going to go fully AI. Although a lot of companies want it to be that case. I have a lot of friends who worked in Netflix games recently, and that all got closed down and shut down, and those people laid off, while Netflix are now trying to pivot towards Gen AI, which I think is stupid. I think it's the wrong thing to do, because I don't see that that's going to be a thing that's going to solve their problem. I don't think they need to fire everybody and use Gen AI to make a game. I don't think that's going to be the future. And from people who I've spoke to who are on large design positions, they know that, like, there is no real immediate threat from Gen AI, because it still can, at the highest level, produce stuff that is needed for games, for production, for pipelines. It's still a long ways off. So I think in general, and especially now, because like the European Union have now passed laws in my side of the world where, they have put in regulations that models now need to disclose where the information comes from, and if it comes from an unethical source, they can't be used in production or anything commercial. So the laws are now starting to catch up with the technology, which is needed as well, because it also poses a bigger existential threat to not just art, but loads of industries across the board. So I think in general, the existential threat of AI won't hit as fast as people think it will, and I don't think it's going to displace as many people as it will. Also, on my side of the pond, they're talking about things like universal basic income and things that would support people in terms of like having an income even if they're not within work. Like Ireland, for example, across the pond from me, that my Irish co cousins, they've just set up a fund to give money to artists who are making art, to continue to make art, even though there is economical kind of turmoil at the moment. So they're getting grants free from the government, just free money to go out and make and build creative projects, regardless of their income. So again, there is structures being built to help people. Even in Singapore, they've just now built a new system where they're trying to put aside a fund so that in 20 years' time, people who have come out of university or college right now, they can then go in 20 years' time, retrain off the government's back, because they've started to realize, especially with it, stuff like AI, things they'll learn in college right now and come out and graduate with won't be relevant in 20 years. So they need to go back and retrain again. Kind of like what I've done in my life, where I was an engineer for long enough and I went back and retrained as an artist, or a game developer. So yeah, I think it's one of these things that people will try to always jump in what is new and trending. But I think as long as you stay the course, and especially if your company has something like a mission statement where you try and illustrate key points of what makes you you as a company and what you want to try and stick to, I think you'll always survive that turmoil of war. As long as you keep your North Star, I think a lot of companies will survive the hardship of what they're going through right now, because um, building good communication, good morals, and good standards within a company, I think, will outlast any jump in tech or kind of fad that appears. I think stuff like, and you see the people move, everybody who's big into crypto, when they had that explosion and then that kind of died overnight. Everybody who was in crypto went in NFTs, and then anybody who left NFTs eventually went into AI. So they've just kind of jumped from one thing to the next over the last 3 or 4 years since COVID. And I think it's one of these things that, yeah, as long as you guys are doing your excellent work that you're doing, I think you'll always be relevant. You'll always be needed. And it won't be a thing where you have to feel like you have to, constantly adjust for what's coming. I think you guys are always going to be in need and always going to be valid in what you do. Yeah.
uh, Sort of like I mentioned earlier, like it's not necessarily even a bonus bullet point, but the absence of the bullet point makes people wonder, like, what are you doing? And you think about crypto NFTs, you think about the COVID boom in gaming, and then all the chaos and layoffs, and then now you think about AI. If I'm a CEO of a big public company, if I'm not talking about these things,
Oh yeah.
I'm losing my job, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so there's no downside to making bold projections and steering a lot of money that way for you,
Yeah.
because you're leading them on the strategy. And if the strategy ultimately doesn't pan out because the whole thing was a sham or what have you, that's not on you. That's on all the people that lose their jobs.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So for me, it is balancing that, right? Because I do need to make sure we stay relevant,
Yeah.
but at the same time, yeah, our mission is, ethical, transparent, honest, and that's why we've got high word of mouth,
Mhm.
and we treat every project, no matter how big or small, like it's we need to be doing our best work. We need to be our most honest with our customers, clients, even if it's painful to do so, or potentially could cost us, money or opportunity.
Mhm.
And I'm with you. I do believe that that will serve us well, no matter
Mhm.
what we're doing in 2 years. Really,
Mhm.
the key is to, I'm at our heart, what I try to sell folks on here, but also on the business level when I'm dealing with the people with the money and the deal makers, is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we're problem solvers. You throw cash at us, we
Mhm.
solve your problems. Like, that's the way it is. And it just so happens that our main lens, well, it started with UX consulting and user research, and then it added some UI and wireframe and prototyping. Then it made it look prettier. Then
Yep.
it made it, we put the things in the engine and things like that.
Mhm.
And so we're just solving more. Now we do some back end development work as well with partners of ours.
Right.
Like, it's just, what's your problem? Okay, you trust us.
Mhm.
Hey, let us help you. Maybe we're not as well known as other folks, but you trust us. We're already in your system. Let us work together. So I think the being problem solvers, both at our vision and mission level, but also in the people who we retain and how we reward them for being problem solvers, not sitting around waiting for something to happen for them,
Yep.
or sitting at their desk when something's broken or things like that.
Yeah.
That is foundational to us. And I agree with you that even though what I'm doing with the company in 2 years might look different than what we're doing now, we'll be able to find a space to make that happen.
Yeah.
That's my strong belief, especially with the team that we've assembled and continue to assemble here.
Yes. No, agreed. And like I said, I think as long as you have that North Star, it was an interesting business plan aspect of things when I was working with my friend a couple of years ago and he was trying to launch a company and make his own thing. And one of the people he was dealing with when they gave him kind of business training was saying, if you could break your company down into 3 words, what would those 3 words be? And he had to think really hard about, like, well, what is my company in 3 words? Oh God, that is really difficult, because when you try to break it down to a foundational, 3 syllables, like what would be the thing that makes you you? It was difficult for him to try and think of, like, oh, well, okay, well, the first one is always going to be art, and then it's maybe like communication, because so, like, when you start to break it down into those things, I think it's great to see where you think about, if you had to describe a company in 3 words, what would it be? And that's always a great exercise, because it makes you think about your core values, beliefs, and what you think is the mission, the thing you're following, the thing you're driving towards. What would that be? And I think for a lot of companies, it's like, like years ago when EA, had the logo, they always used to come in and say EA Games, and it was challenge everything. And people are always like, oh yeah, like, that is an interesting thing of, like, and even like the thing that Blizzard done years ago, because when you go and visit the Blizzard campuses, they have the statue of Garrosh in the middle, but round about the edge of that is their core morals about what they think as a company, and That was even brought into question a couple of years ago when the whole China thing was coming in and that, and people were talking about it. But that's a thing when you have those core values. I think those, no matter what problem you face, will always be something that you aim towards, right? It's always something that you look in the future and think, well, the waters might be working. And it was interesting the comparison the woman actually gave to Matt when she talked about the business training, when she was like, think of your business as a ship in water and you're heading towards land, and no matter how murky or dangerous the sea seems, your compass in hand is those three words, and as long as you always have that, no matter where you're heading, as long as you stick to those models and those bases, then you'll always find shore. So it's a thing of like, yeah, people try to pivot, and like Netflix, when they're like they all overnight after budgeting all this money for this project, and then all of a sudden being like, we're going to fire everybody, we're going to make games with Gen AI. It's like that doesn't, I don't know if Netflix has a core thing, but like that probably doesn't land to where they originally thought was the core value of what they wanted to build. And like, yeah, now that's a decision they've made. But the bigger small companies I've seen have always had a steadfast idea of like who they are as a business and what their identity is, and that's been something that's driven them through the hardest times. So I think that's the thing you always have to do in business. So yeah,
for us, so for me, I always had and you'll see the parallel structure.
Yeah.
I had the sort of 3 and a bit words, right? So for Jason Smart Consults, when I was a solo,
Mhm.
it was honest, trustworthy, and fun to work with.
Right.
And for UX is fine because we have UX in our title, but we do so much more.
Yes.
So we've had to go with a tag, and these are really more taglines in some ways that like, honest, trustworthy, and fun to work with. To me, that is about like, that is to our core, our mission, and independent of services. Whereas for the educational purposes, now we're intuitive, immersive, and in your engine, right? But that's not our mission, right?
Right.
That is what we provide to you as a value proposition, and why you want to at least pick up the email, phone, whatever, and give us the call. So it's like I've been re-educating and educating people, because I was the honest, trustworthy, and fun to work person forever, but people didn't know I was doing all these different things now. And so part of it has been this re-education. But when I come up with, sort of the mission statement, which I can't recall that we're iterating on, I can't recall now. I included it in a RFP that we had to do. I kind of waited, but yeah, I like, there is a difference between honest, trustworthy, and fun to work with, because I actually feel like that still represents the heart of UX is fine, right? We are like that, but we need a different mission now that we're more people and things like that. But there's the what you do, right? Intuitive, immersive, in your engine. And then it's the who you are and how you're going to exist in the world and provide value and make sure that you're like confident and comfortable in what you want to do with your life in this world to make enough money to retire at some point.
It's the dream for us all. I think as someone who's definitely a wee bit older in their career as well, I definitely feel that pressure of, it's always the scary thing. You think to yourself, oh, you're retired. That's only 20-ish years away from me at this point, because I'm 40 next year. But then it's like people who are in their 20s. I know when I was in my 20s, I didn't have that problem. I didn't think that far ahead about like, oh yeah, how am I going to retire or put money away? But I've learned a lot about stock exchanges in the last couple of years and putting money away in S&Ps and stuff. So, but like, yeah, it's we get a state pension here from when you think you hit 65, 66. But I think by the time I'm old enough to claim a pension, we're not going to have one anymore. But who knows where the world's going at this point? It's a bit upside down at the moment, but we'll see what the future holds. But yeah, so I think that is the thing. Like you said, as long as you stay true to your mission, you'll always end up in a good place. And I think that's the case for you guys. And having talked to you for a short time, I definitely feel like you're a boss who cares, Jason. I think you're one of these guys that it would be fun to work with you at one point, because I think you do give a shit about people in your industry, and I think that's not rare, because I know a lot of studios who have great managers and great art directors, but we've all heard plenty of horror stories throughout our career about people working in studios and people at one point sleep under their desks. So it's like, yeah, it's refreshing to hear people who want to help, and like you said, talking to people and bringing people in who it's their first gig or it's their first job out of school. It's very rare as well, because you and I both know it's something that isn't done a lot in this industry, and to see people championing that, it's actually, it brings a bit of hope back into humanity, I think, and rekindles my spirit for there are good people in the industry wanting to do good things. So yeah, it's good that you're your mission includes that. It includes helping people at the lowest levels. So I'm glad that you're forefronting that at the front of your company. So yeah, we're going to be conscious of Jason's time, because obviously he has a company to run, as you've heard. He's got things to do. Just again to thank you guys for getting to this point and listening. Thanks for Jason for coming on and giving up your time. I hope you enjoyed it, Jason.
My pleasure. When I get to Scotland again, we'll catch up over a pint of heavy, if that's even possible to get a local one in Scotland anymore. We can talk about that, or maybe we already did, but beforehand. But
man, definitely. You're welcome. Welcome here anytime.
No, I love it, and I've only seen part of it. So
So for you guys who are sticking on, I'll leave a lot of relevant links that Jason will send me below. If you guys want to check out UX is Fine and his company and his work and what they do, or anything that he's talked about, I'll try and include those below. And that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, leave them there in the comments, of course, as always. And we will see you in the next episode. Again, thanks to you. Again, thanks to Jason. And we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.